Welcome to AM Best Audio.
I'm John Weber for AM Best TV, and today I'm joined by two distinguished researchers from Florida State University. They are Professor Patricia Bourne and Professor Dana Telljohann. Their recent study, Natural Disasters and Regulatory Constraints, U.S. Homeowners Insurance Market Responses, explores how insurers adjust their behavior in the face of catastrophic weather events and the regulations that can either help or hinder that response. Their research provides a closer look at how the homeowners insurance market navigates risk, regulatory frameworks, and the evolving threat of climate change. We're looking forward to learn more about the implications for insurers, regulators, and policyholders alike. And Dana, let's start with you. What motivated you to study the intersection of natural disasters and regulatory constraints in the U.S. homeowners insurance market?
Yes, so this paper was a chapter in my dissertation, and when I was motivating my dissertation, I was using what I had learned in industry. And prior to coming to Florida State, I was working at Cincinnati Insurance, and one thing that I saw is when we were responding to natural disasters, we weren't just focused on rate. We were focused on either changing deductibles or changing coverage, something along those lines. And so the story in the media was that insurers are just trying to get more and more and more money out of this to pay for disasters. And when I started working on this paper, my belief was that we were going to find that insurers were actually trying to respond differently to the disasters and not necessarily just try to get rate. So when we started going through the data, what we were finding is that insurers were working with information they were gathering from these major disasters to either change their coverage language, or most importantly, what we found is that they're getting new information and they're changing how they're asking the questions to the insurers to be able to place their policies. So if they found a lot of damage to roofs, that's what we were seeing, is that they would now have the application process updated to include questions about roofing.
And if I could just add, we were looking at this in the context of all the possible responses insurers could have when something kind of unexpected hits them, or a series of unexpected events, or years of performance, and realizing that there's a lot of different things insurers can do, diversify their portfolios, and but we wanted specifically to look at these things that require us to consider the regulatory environment as well. Like, what are the constraints on them for changing what they're doing in a market?
Dana, your research explores how insurers respond after natural disasters. What kinds of market behaviors did you observe following major events?
There's the common, we did find that they would look at rate, but actually the paper really explores, we found that following these major disasters, insurers were changing what we called complex filings. And so anything complex would be anything that involves some sort of form change. So insurers were going to the regulator and saying that we either need to change maybe the deductible, the application, maybe we want to change it, add an exclusion. And so what we found is that following extreme major disasters, and I'm not just talking about your run-of-the-mill, there was a tornado or an average hurricane that could be predicted through some sort of catastrophic modeling. I'm talking about the worst of the worst. Insurers were using information gained from those to then adjust something that was going on either with the policy or with the application, instead of just focusing on rate, because you can only get so much rate. People are only going to pay so much money for something, but the insurer also needs to protect themselves. And so maybe there was a difference in like I had mentioned before, we had picked up that there was a change in roofing, and roofing seems to be one of the major issues that insurers are having right now. So maybe they gained additional information that everything that's over 20 years old on a roof, we had to do a complete replacement for. And so they're gaining that information and then changing either how they're asking questions on applications, maybe they're adding deductibles, maybe they're changing something like that. But all of that requires a discussion with the regulator. And so what we found is that these discussions increase following these major natural catastrophes. And it's not something that we're seeing in something like your average run-of-the-mill tornado, or just accounting for inflation, so no disasters during that. It's really these worst of the worst that are not as easy to pick up through the catastrophe models.
Dana, can you walk us through how regulatory constraints such as rate approvals or moratoriums shape insurers' post-disaster decisions?
Yes, so following disasters, insurers have a lot of different options that they can make. And Dr. Bourne had mentioned they can increase reinsurance, change financial holdings, anything along those lines. And so this paper really focuses on, are they trying to change their operations in the state? And so an insurer, if they want to change their rates, they want to change their rules. So rules would be like kind of the factors like, are you in a bad tier, medium tier, average tier? Any of that stuff would be considered one of the rules, or if they want to change their forms. And so forms include, like I said, applications, anything with the coverage language. So following some of these natural disasters, what we were seeing is that insurers were increasing their filings. And they're engaging with the regulator because they have this new information. So we do see, again, that insurers need to increase rates in order to get more premium for the disaster or the recovery or anything along those lines. But what we found, and what was a little bit different than what's been reported in the media, is that insurers were also trying to use these events to gain more information. And I think that was the big takeaway of this paper, is that the engagement with the regulator wasn't necessarily push rate. The engagement with the regulator was, hey, we have more information, and how are we going to use this information now to change our operations in the state? And it depends on the size of the disaster too. And what we, again, like I was saying, is that these big disasters, so some of the worst of the worst, so it was 10 billion or more in damages across the entire state. Now, it's not necessarily by the insurer, but across the state, we see an increase in the filings by an insurer, or in this engagement by the regulator.
Customize your data experience. BestLink now offers an interactive company dashboard that provides company-level intelligence in a fast, user-friendly interface featuring interactive tables, charts, and Sparkline performance histories. Customize the dashboard tiles to prioritize the insurer ratings, data, and analytics that best support your workflow. AM Best. Our insight, your advantage.
Dana, were there notable differences in insurer responses between more strictly regulated states and those with a lighter regulatory touch?
That's not something that we found in this paper. So some of the prior literature has found that competitive versus non-competitive states, so ones in which the regulator has strict regulation, meaning that everything has to be approved prior, that there were differences in the reaction. And that's not something that we found. We found that insurers were solely responding to the information. And we did not look at approvals. We did not look at whether they withdrew we did look at withdrawing of filings, but our initial reaction was, following this, are insurers reaching out to the regulator? And that's what we do find. Regardless of what kind of regulatory environment they are in, insurers are reaching out to the regulators in their state to change coverages or possibly rate.
Patty, how do you think your findings might inform policy discussions around solvency, affordability, and availability of homeowners coverage?
Yeah, I think we have a lot to say in our findings about the way the regulator can be involved in ensuring a smooth functioning market. And part of that is what we mentioned in the paper is that recognizing what insurance companies need in order to continue to operate, it's important that the regulators act in a timely manner and engage with the insurance company to figure out what is necessary to keep the insurer in the market. I think insurers do want to stay in these markets despite the catastrophes and the uncertainty. But if the regulator is not able to provide some flexibility or help them get what they need, then we're going to see insurance companies having to leave those markets if they can't be profitable. And I think another part of that is that there are other options in states. What we're seeing in California right now with wildfires, the insurance companies are pushing the policyholders into the residual market. So we have a fair plan picking up in people, and it's creating a lot of anxiety among policyholders and among policymakers in California. And I think there needs to be more discussion about the appropriate division of this risk across the private market, public market, and the role of the regulator in kind of directing traffic with respect to this risk to the appropriate channels.
And I also just want to add, part of our paper, we looked at the insurer engaging with the regulator, and what we find is that those that do engage with the regulator are increasing their business within 2 years following the disaster. So we're seeing that these the use of this regulation is actually, the use of the regulator is actually helping improve the insurer's performance in the state, or at least their comfortability working in the state. So it's like Dr. Bourne had mentioned, or like Patty had mentioned, is that insurers want to stay in the state. They're not looking to exit. And so these are just tools that they're using to remain in the state.
Dana, how do you envision future research building on your findings to further support industry and regulatory decision-making in the face of growing climate risk?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of papers that are in the works. And so like I had mentioned, my dissertation was examining this interaction between regulators and insurers. One thing that I want to do that I wasn't able to accomplish with this paper was actually go into the individual filings and see what the insurers are requesting. So a lot of times these filings are encrypted. So it's building a relationship with the NAIC to get this data, unencrypted files that I can data scrape and see in these rate filings, they're requesting XYZ. In the form filings, we're really seeing a change in deductibles, which from what I've been able to find is not necessarily the case. A lot of what it came down to was applications, but I can't 100% say that right now because I just have a subsample of these. So one of the things is actually expanding on this paper to look at exactly what the filings are for following these major natural catastrophes. Another paper Dr. Bourne and I are looking at is how do insurers engage with the regulators? What is that decision-making process? So what is causing them to say, this now needs to change? We have some papers that are looking at exits in the state, and what we're finding is that insurers do not want to exit the state. That's the third paper of my dissertation. And so what is keeping them directly in the market? Is it necessarily this engagement with the regulator, or is there something else, such as maybe reinsurance or some other sort of financial option that they have, like catastrophe bonds or alternative risk financing in some way?
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Dana just mentioned, and that is that we explored some data that I think is very interesting and pretty new in the research community. The information that we have now on the insurance companies' filings is pretty rich and not something that you have to wade through too much to get a general sense of insurer behaviors, not just after catastrophes, but in other research, I'm looking at how insurance companies are watching each other's filings and making decisions based on what other companies are doing. And I think there's a lot of future research in using this type of activity when insurance companies are engaging with the regulator to understand more about insurance company strategies not just to stay in a market and following a catastrophe, but in a lot of other senses.
Patty, Dana, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Professor Patricia Bourne and Professor Dana Telljohann from Florida State University. And I'm John Weber for AM Best TV. Looking to get the full attention of the insurance industry? We have the platforms that will do just that. Whether it be AM Best TV, AM Best Audio, Best Review Magazine, or Best Day. Find out more by calling AM Best Advertising Sales at 908-439-2200, extension 5399, and have a great day.